All right, Bryn, are we good to go?
Yes, we are.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our March webinar. So today we are going to chat sports wagering. We are going to cover a lot in the next 30 minutes, and we'll leave some time for questions at the very end. So before we jump in, I'm going to set some groundwork with a short review of the current legislation and the guidelines, and then I'll hand it over to some of our celebrity guests. Again, my name is Julie Zeich. I am one of the associate directors here on the Division III GMS team, and today I am super happy to be joined by Clint Hunkebrow and Carrie Wheelhouse. So before we dive in, Clint and Carrie, do you want to give some brief introductions?
Yeah, I could start first. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you may be. My name is Clint Hunkebrow, as Julie mentioned, and I serve as our Managing Director of Enterprise Risk Management. I've been here with the national office for about 15 years in different roles, but part of my current role involves helping coordinate a lot of our harm reduction work that we do in the sports betting space across the national office. Really pleased to be with you all today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Wheelhouse. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Health Promotion in the NCAA Sports Science Institute. The work that we do in SSI is to help advance the NCAA's health, safety, and performance strategic priorities. I've been here for almost 4 years, and the work that I do in the health promotion line is really related to student athlete mental health, substance misuse and related disorders, prevention, and prevention of interpersonal violence and other health promotion topics. So glad to be here with you today. And Julie, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Carrie. So like I said, today I'm going to give a brief overview and just set the groundwork on what the legislation and guidelines are surrounding sports wagering. And then really I want to give Clint and Carrie both time to talk about the great work that they're doing with their staffs. As a shameless plug, tomorrow, Corey Berg and myself will be doing an additional webinar where we're going to get more into the nitty gritty and application of the legislation and the guidelines. So to start, let's talk about the legislation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we're talking about sports wagering, as far as legislation goes, it lives in bylaw 10. So here you can see we're talking about 10021, 10022, and 103. Next slide, please. And you're probably like, Julie, cool, bylaws. We don't know what those are at the top of our head, and that's totally cool because that's what I'm here for. So let's start with bylaw 10021. And what this is at the NCAA, what do we mean when we say sports wagering? And what this bylaw says is sports wagering is basically the act of placing, accepting, or soliciting wager on any type of intercollegiate, amateur, or professional team contest. It's worth noting this is only specific to sports that the NCAA sponsors. So NASCAR, you're good. Volleyball, you're bad. And now you might be asking, next slide, please. But what exactly is a wager in the context of sports wagering? And this is one that trips up people quite a bit. As defined in bylaw 10022, a wager is something where you need to give something to get something. So for example, you pay that $5, you want to enter your friend's March Madness bracket, and there's a chance of winning something. Because you're giving something with the potential to get something, that would trigger a wager. Now, if it was a free bracket, so you're not putting anything down and there's only a chance to win something, per our legislative definition, that would not be considered a wager. Sports wagering legislation does apply to all athletic staff members, anyone who has any sort of ties to the athletic department. Our conference staff, I see some of you on the call here, definitely applies to you, and of course, our student athletes. So examples of sports wagering, what comes to mind? This isn't used as much nowadays, but the old word bookie, like Old Smoky Joe, parlay cards, internet sports wagering. So we hear a lot about the FanDuels, the DraftKings, etc., fantasy league pools, and prediction markets. which I believe Clint will hit on prediction markets later today. If not, we will tomorrow. And then I also want to talk about the guidelines a little bit. So we talked about what sports wagering is, what a wager is, and what would constitute a violation of that. If student athletes are involved in a sports wagering violation, we've got guidelines that you can refer to talk about what the repercussions of that would be. And really, there are two different buckets. The first bucket you can see here addresses the most common violations that we see. So internet bets, best place on apps, like I said, the FanDuels, the DraftKings. And on the right-hand side in this super small print, that's a screenshot of what the guidelines actually are. Anytime there's a sports wagering violation, you can expect rules and prevention education. If there is a large dollar value wagered, there could be an associated withholding condition and required repayment of any winnings. So if you have a net profit, you're probably going to have to make repayment of that to a charity of their choice. And then the last slide for me, the next slide, touches on this second bucket of guidelines, which are more egregious violations. And here we're talking about integrity issues. So you're involved in point shaving that could influence the outcome of a game. The guideline for that is pretty significant, which could include permanent ineligibility, or if you wager on your own sport at another collegiate institution, the guideline starts at 50%. So that's kind of the groundwork of where we are when we're talking about legislation and guidelines. I will now turn it over to our celebrity guests to talk about the work that they've been doing in this space.
Thanks, Julie. I'll kick us off to start. So I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit more to the health and safety space around sports betting. So over the last several years, the legal landscape in sports betting has changed a great deal federally and at each state. And so as those changes had been going on, there was a lot of discussion around the membership and from the membership around what are the health and safety impacts of sports betting on student athletes. And in September of 2024, CSMAS, also known as the Committee on Competitive Safeguards and Medical Aspects of Sports, or the NCAA's member-led committee that works on health and safety related topics, they identified multi-level risks associated with sports betting. And what multi-level means really is that the risks and potential harms from sports betting don't occur in just one way, and they don't occur at just one point in time. Broadly, they can be categorized into these three buckets of integrity concerns, social pressures, and health impacts. And in SSI, we spend a lot of our time talking around those health impacts, and those social pressures can sometimes intersect or overlap with the health impacts. And so when we're talking about those things, the health impacts, we can see that at an individual level, there may be a student athlete who's engaging in sports betting in a way that is problematic and potentially something that places them at risk of having a mental health condition called gambling disorder. So important to note that at a certain level, gambling activity, when problematic and causing impairment in day-to-day life, can be a mental health condition called gambling disorder. Another way that we can see potential harms from sports betting is at an interpersonal level, meaning an interaction between a student athlete and someone else. So even if a student athlete isn't engaging in sports betting behaviors themselves, they may be getting pressured from somebody else who is gambling or betting on sports, or maybe receiving harassment from somebody who is betting. So we can certainly see those social pressures and impacts on health in that regard as well. Next slide, please. Over the next few slides, I'm going to show you some great research that's out of the Office of Research that just gives you an overview. I'll note that the research outcomes here do include gambling broadly and sports betting, and I will do my best to clarify when we are talking about gambling versus sports betting, but noting sports betting is a subset or type of gambling. So when you look at this slide in front of you, it is about the gambling behaviors broadly of NCAA men. And what the takeaway from this slide is that generally over time, there are fewer men who are engaging in gambling activities than used to be in past years. But when we look at this, we can see that over 20% of NCAA men still participate in gambling by playing cards for money. by playing games of personal skill, by playing the lottery, or by betting on sports. On the next slide, we'll get a chance to see the same type of data outcomes, but for NCAA women. And here again, some takeaways are that we see fewer women engaging in gambling behaviors than the male student athletes. And we see a trend where decreasing amounts of women are participating in gambling behavior over the course of the last several years. And the only category where we see more than 20% of women stating that they engage in this type of gambling is by playing the lottery. There's only 5% of NCAA women who say that they bet on sports. So the next slide, several slides will hone a little bit more in on the men, being that there's a higher proportion of male student athletes engaging in sports betting. So when we look at this slide, and I'm sorry if the formatting is not quite showing up for you, the big takeaways I'll highlight here verbally, but we can see that over time, when we break down participation in sports betting by NCAA men, and we break it down by division, we can see that generally speaking, there is a decrease again over time in NCAA men participating in sports betting specifically. But one of the things to note here is that when we ask about the frequency, how often they're betting, there are some trends that show potentially more problematic ways of betting. So particularly among our Division III men. So while there is generally a decreasing number of people participating in betting on sports, we do see increasing number of NCAA men reporting that they bet at least monthly or at least weekly, with the highest proportion of those student athletes being in Division III. So 16.9% of Division III men betting at least monthly, and almost 10% of Division III men betting at least weekly, and those frequencies being more at risk of being problematic. Can I get the next slide, please? I think it's maybe going. There we go. Thank you. Some of the other trends that we can see over time are that when we look at the NCAA men who are, again, gambling broadly, we see more of them or a higher number of them reporting that they're gambling alone than used to, whereas the women who are reporting gambling are doing so more so socially. So again, some more trends in the potentially more at-risk ways of betting. Next slide. When we look at this specifically on sports betting, again, we see about 2/3 of men reporting that they are betting on sports through mobile wagering or a legal online sportsbook. And again, just noting that by doing so on your cell phone or on your mobile device, there's more opportunity to be doing that alone or in potentially, again, that more risky way. Next slide, please. We also see some trends towards a higher amount of money being reported as lost in one day due to betting than we used to see. So for both men and women, some increasing trends in having $50 to $300 lost in a single day due to a bet, but among the men, starting to see even higher amounts of money lost per day than we used to see. Next slide. So again, all the past few slides indicate that we are seeing some decrease in betting behaviors generally or broadly, but of those who are betting, there is potentially more concern for it being problematic, and it appears that among the Division III men in particular, some of those more problematic behaviors may be occurring. This now transitions to questions about seeking help for problem gambling. When student athletes were asked if they had felt like they had a problem with gambling, a relatively small portion of them said that they thought that they might have that. So 2% or less of student athletes. But when that question was asked specifically to the people who reported that they were betting at least once a month, that number increases to up to 7.5% of Division III men thinking or feeling like they might have a problem with gambling. Next slide, please. When we ask then the student athletes if they know where to go to get help for problem gambling, we see that only about 10 to 12% of student athletes report knowing where to go. And when we break that down again by division, more Division III student athletes seem to know where to go on campus for help than the other divisions. but still only about 1/4 of Division III men feel like they know where to go, specifically when asking those who have bet on sports at least once a month. So of those who are more likely to have problem gambling, only about 1/4 of them know where to go on campus to find help. So I'm going to transition now to the next few slides to talking a little bit more about some of the resources that we do have available to help. So the NCAA mental health best practices provide guidance for member schools on supporting student-athlete mental health. Very broadly, they have some foundational principles that talk about risk and protective factors for mental health. And then they outline 4 best practices for helping support student-athletes, including creating environments that promote mental health and well-being, using screening tools to identify student-athletes who might have mental health signs and conditions, having action plans to refer those student athletes to licensed mental health providers, and assuring that people who are doing the formal evaluation for mental health conditions are licensed mental health providers. Next slide. The QR code on this slide here will take you to the landing page for the mental health best practices, and I provide that to you because there are a ton of resources on this page that can be used to help support each of the best practices. So the screenshot just gives you a quick overview for an example of best practice number 1, creating healthy environments, several different resources that member schools can use there. And this particular best practice has a lot of things related to social media for student athletes who might be experiencing harassment from a bettor. Next slide. There are also some resources available on the mental health best practices landing page that are more specific to licensed mental health providers, things that outline different screening tools that they can use to evaluate student athletes who might be at risk for problem gambling. And also one that I want to highlight for you is the lower risk gambling guidelines, which provides a bit of some guidance around where gambling behaviors may be less risky or potentially less harmful in terms of frequency or how much money is being bet, and when they potentially become more problematic. So some great resources for education there. Next slide. Last summer, the Sports Science Institute, in collaboration with CSMAS, also put out this resource called Harm Reduction Considerations for Gambling and Sports Betting in Collegiate Sports. Essentially, this outlines education, destigmatizing language, and implementing the mental health best practices specifically in the context of sports betting as 3 ways that schools can work to help reduce the harm student athletes might experience from sports betting. So this includes a whole bunch of different resources, educational modules, fact sheets, research data, et cetera, that schools can use in a fashion that kind of serves as a one-stop shop for how to put the mental health best practices in action, specifically in the context of sports betting. Next slide. And lastly, the Sports Science Institute also puts out a webinar series called the SSI Spotlight. And this QR code will take you to a spotlight where we had the opportunity to feature Dr. Jeff Darevensky, who's one of the investigators on the research study with all the data that I just showed you, as well as Paul Buck, who is the CEO and founder of Epic Global Solutions, a company that provides education to our member schools that I'm sure Clint will talk a little bit more about in some of his presentation here, but some really great information from those folks on research, education opportunities, and signs of what to look for in a student athlete who might be experiencing problem gambling behavior. And I think that wraps up my slides, so I'll pass it to you, Clint, to take us home.
Great. Thank you so much, Carrie. So as we get to the tail end here of the webinar, I just wanted to really walk you all through some of the great resources that we've provided at the NCAA level, in addition to what Carrie shared. So I know it may be a little bit hard to follow along with these screenshots here, but I would encourage you all, maybe after the webinar is done, to go to www.ncaa.org/sportsbetting. And that's where all of these resources that I'm going to walk through are accessible to you all. A few of the key resources that I wanted to highlight are first on kind of the top right of the screen there. There's something called Draw the Line, and we're actually doing a relaunch of the Draw the Line campaign on Thursday. But what Draw the Line is is really a free resource available to you all on campuses that has a lot of different collateral that you could customize to your own uses. So think of things like posters that you could print out and put in the locker rooms that talk about the dangers of sports betting and the rules around sports betting, as well as some different social media tools within there to be able to share with your student athletes on campus different messaging from a sports betting standpoint. So all of that's available within the Draw the Line campaign there on the top right. The second thing that's highlighted below the Draw the Line campaign is our sports betting student athlete e-learning module. We rolled this out a couple years ago. It's totally free and accessible. When you click on that link, you're directly go into the e-learning. So we wanted to remove any barriers from student athletes of having to do logins and go into different systems to be able to access. So immediately when you click on that link, you're in the e-learning, and it's about a 15-minute e-learning and covers some of the key topics that we've talked about today, such as the dangers of sports betting when you look at things like problematic gambling behaviors. What are the rules around the NCAA rules around sports betting? What are some of the dangers associated with competition integrity as it relates to sports betting? And then how to handle social media harassment and other harassment that student athletes may receive from a sports betting context. So would definitely encourage you all to use that e-learning module at your disposal. We do have that as a task as part of the eligibility center process as well. So no, not all Division III student athletes necessarily go through that, but it's something certainly some of the prospects at least may have visibility to as they go through the eligibility center process. Below that, I've highlighted the sports betting contact form. And there's a lot of resources there just to ask us general questions that you may have about the sports betting space. But we also have a way to request free in-person campus education through our partnership with Epic Global Solutions that Carrie talked about previously. So would highly encourage you all, if you haven't already, to leverage that tool to have Epic come out to campus and do, typically they're on campus for about a day or two. And you have folks who are former student athletes, former professional athletes who have suffered themselves gambling harm, and they've come out on the other side of that, and they want to share their story with our student athletes to hopefully avoid them from going down a similar path. So it's a great program. We've reached over 100,000 student athletes through that program, again, totally free of charge. So would highly encourage that you reach out to our partners at Epic Global Solutions and have them come out to campus sometimes. It's hard to see there, but right below that contact form, there is a link to the NCPG as well, and that's the National Council of Problem Gambling. We have no affiliation with them, but we do have a really good general working relationship with them, and would encourage you to go to that website. There's a lot of additional resources around problem gambling that are shared on that website. There's also right below that link on this site, there's a 24/7 confidential problem gambling hotline that could be shared across campus. There's a chat feature within that, a web feature, as well as a phone feature. So I think that's a great resource to make available to your student athletes as well. If we go into the next slide, this is, again, still on ncaa.org/sportsbetting, but when you get to the bottom of this page towards the right-hand side, I wanted to just talk through a couple other educational resources that are available to you all. First, we have a PDF resource there that says what student athletes need to know about sports betting. And there's some really good kind of quick hitters that you could share with student athletes there about what the rules are, some key stats around that Carrie just shared from some of our research studies. So would encourage you to look through that information. We also have a FAQ database right below that that you could go in, and kind of has a chat feature where you could type in different key questions in there and see if there may be a resource that's out there to answer that question. And then lastly, one thing that we rolled out last year was a coaches e-learning resource as well. Now this one to assign it to the coaches, you do have to work with your campus NCAA Learning Portal administrator. But that link will provide you all of the instructions on how to go through that process. Again, it's kind of a quick 10-minute e-learning, and it's really customized to coaches of the dangers of problem gambling, how to have some of those critical conversations on campus, how to spot some of the red flags of student athletes who may be suffering from gambling harm. So I would encourage you to leverage that resource as well. And then just lastly, as Julie alluded to earlier, I would be remiss not to close it out to say, we are getting into the season of March Madness, which is the most heavily bet on event overall in the United States. So I would just really encourage you all to be vigilant in your educational efforts, put out reminders to your student athletes, to your coaches, et cetera, that they are not allowed to bet on March Madness or other college sports and professional sports that Julie highlighted earlier. And we are seeing a rapid expansion of, as Julie described, sport prediction markets. And these are through sites like Kalshi and Polymarket. In Kalshi alone, over 2.3 billion was bet on college basketball in the month of February. So just huge numbers. I know they have been very aggressive on marketing on college campuses. And essentially, I won't get into all the details, but they've sort of found this loophole where it's not governed through sports betting at the state level that's regulated by gaming commissions and things like that. It's just separate federal level platforms that are out there, and they're really dangerous. They're available in all 50 states, not just the 39 states that have legalized sports betting, and they're available to anyone 18 plus years of age. And they operate essentially exactly the same as sports betting, and they're certainly a violation of our bylaw 10.3. So I would just encourage you to be watchful of those, and hopefully these resources have been helpful. Don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have any questions that we may answer after this. So with that, I'll stop.
Thank you both. Carrie and Clint have both been excellent teammates and just an area of support for us to work with as we're navigating the sports wagering landscape. We are at 2:00. It appears there are no questions in the Q&A. So as always, if anyone has any questions following this, feel free to reach out. Other than that, have a great rest of your day.